start for today. So welcome to the fourth Dialogue in Sea Conversation series for MONSOON 2023. This I'm Prasad Khanulkar. I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture in Mumbai. Uh, and I'm sort of curating a monsoon series of sea conversations this year. So just to sort of introduce the lecture series before introducing the speaker for today. So this lecture series is, curated and organized by Sea City, which is institutional extension of SEA, the School of Environment and Architecture. So this, sort of an institutional appendage was conceived as a public platform for dialogue on architectural, social, and cultural issues pertaining to the spatial environment that we produce and inhabit. It was conceived, and so the conversation was started in 2014. And since then, every semester, we curate Sea Conversations, which is a fortnightly public dialogue and lecture series around a specific theme. And the theme is decided based on something that resonates with our current times. So for this semester, for the Monsoon 2023, Sea Conversation is curated around the theme of care. So it's titled To Inhabit with Care. The conversation, or to inhabit with care, is located in the contemporary context of a world where everything seems uncertain, particularly in terms of challenges of climate change, the erasure of social security systems for a majority of people, the recurrent pandemics that we've been living with, the deepening of xenophobia, as well as different kinds of social inequalities across the world, but also a sort of dominance of a certain idea of care, which is financialized and a medicalized idea of life, of health, but also of care. Right. So the idea here was to think about how do we rethink care for our contemporary times, but also how do we think with care, or engage with others with some idea of care. So it really has been over the last month and going on here on an interrogation of the idea of care and the practices of care with which we inhabit, or with which we can inhabit. So the Sea Conversation is curated and organized by Sea City, and it's partially funded by Urban Center Mumbai, which is a node for dialogue and ideation to carry out research pertaining to sustainable urban development. So it's been a partnership that has been going on for a few years. So for today, to speak about the idea of care, we have Mohit Shelare. Mohit is an artist based in India. He works with different mediums, performances, he makes objects, drawings, but also text. What sort of centers his practice is, his practice sort of constructed around thinking with and around body, waste, and resistance, how they're intertwined with each other, and how they sort of draw out different sites, events, and conditions. Apart from being an artist, Mohit is also a teacher who facilitates research and conducts modules in different universities and institutions. Presently, he serves as a visiting faculty at the National Institute of Design, NID Kurukshetra. He's also currently teaching at the Head Start University in Bangalore. Mohit has received many awards, shown his work in different platforms, and has been a recipient of different residencies. This includes the Prince Claus Seat Award, which he received this year from Netherlands, the Inlax Fine Art Award in India again this year, and his past residencies and awards include the Regional Art Assembly in Australia, the 5 million incidents organized by Goethe, the Kochi Student Biennale, staging the contemporary, as well as Sifting Future in Switzerland. And so he's been a part of different artistic events, but also different kinds of residency. So today's talk is titled Contaminated Association and Floating Existence. I'll hand it over to Mohit, but just to sort of explain the format, so Mohit will be talking and showing his work for 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussions and question and answers. So if you have any questions and answers as you go along, please post them in the chat box or the Q&A chat box. For those of you who are on YouTube, you can post them in the comments section, so sort of aggregate them at the end of the talk. So I'll hand it over to Mohit. Thanks, Mohit, for joining us and for agreeing to this talk. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Prasad. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is well and kind of coping with the excess water which we have currently in our cities. So as Prasad said, the title of my today's talk and presentation is Contaminated Association and Floating Existence. So the invitation I had received when I was doing the residency at Bombay since like 2 months before. And since then, I'm continuously thinking about the prompt about care and inhabitants. And so far, I come up with some notes which kind of intervene with some of work which I'm doing. So I'm going to read some notes, and after some time I will share some of images. I hope you are able to hear me.
Yes, yes.
As usual, Bombay and many other cities are sinking and collapsing in each monsoon, floating in the water that crosses the limits of architecture. At the same time, changing the names of important infrastructure is the construction of symbolic, more concrete, or perhaps more toxic than everyday urban materiality coming from the development of the city. Sooner or later, all of Bombay will sink, and we all wanted to see that day desperately. The 7 lands re-emerge again as separate lands as it was in the past, but only change will be the city will be floating in the mix-up of seawater, rainwater, and wastewater. The lack of separation between these water is not only a natural catastrophe, but an important incident to rethink and move ahead into unarrivable. My last month's stay in Bombay boiled me up, not so different from the Delhi heat. I was able to travel before the heavy rain started in Bombay and arrive in Bangalore. The Bangalore weather helped you to reducing your migraine. Conversation with friends in Bangalore about the city opened colonial history of weather. As told, many British prefer to come to Bangalore as weather is much cooler than other cities. The syllabus climate of Bangalore attracted the ruling class and led to the establishment of famous military cantonment. The area became not only the military base for British, but also the settlement for the large number of Europeans, Anglo-Indians, and missionaries. So taking care of health in relation to weather was the establishment of military base that Europeans wanted to control while taking care of themselves. This happened, this has produced settlement of colonials. This is no different from the working class migrant in Bombay or any other cities. Earning a daily wage is a difficult task, and not taking care of oneself, ready to work in the machinery of smart cities, sustaining their families, is also the care that one provides back to their homes, towns, and families. So, which care we are talking about and which care we are able to practice? Care as a phenomena is itself something to think about and unpack. Care is another term describe the relation where the care is going to apply. The care means the connection, near one or distance, material or ideal, literal or ambiguous. Care cannot take place without connection. Therefore, care is a relation. Now, what sort of relation does one have with the world is the question. For example, endogamy is the main formulation or structure in Hindu society to protect the purity of caste. The relation here maintained by endogamy, articulate in Manu, described as an act of protection. Protection is sold in our capital or post-capital civilization as a care. Protection from accidents, catastrophe, and pandemics. The protection from future itself. To control the time and space. In this imaginary process, coming out from the real creates possible, which intervene into the acts of care. What is possible? This question stays in my mind, still occupied, and so far, my response to what is possible is, it is anything, a kind of open ontology. This possible can be anything which crosses the threshold of real and virtual and choreograph the act of life. So tomorrow is possible, but this possibility itself brings us into what to do with possible. The possible has a tendency in relation to life, it wants to survive. Possible in a pragmatic sense is to survive. Without life, possible does not exist. However, there are possible that is society. So, this is a dust ball, the project which me and one of my friend Murli Chandra did during after our masters completed. So this is an abandoned site in Greater Noida, which was closed since many years, and the site has a relevant amount of dust in it. So we were intervening the site, spending time and working with it. So the ball here comes from the collection of dust which is on my body. I was collecting this dust every day, which comes with the sweat and skin particles and dust, and shrinking the space in a tiny ball. So holding on the thought of society, in this sense, society is not mean I do not care, but changes our imaginary and symbolic. Some of the lines from Rohit Varmula's letter, which opens the value of human. I quote, "The value of man reduced to his immediate identity and nearest possibility, to a vote, to a number, to a thing. Never was man treated as a mind, as a glorious thing made up of stardust." The line here, which you probably see, is a kind of outcome of one of the performance, again part of the same project, same site, where I'm kind of going closer to the ground or floor, inhaling the dust and exhaling the cleaning. And through that, the line is taking place. So holding on the thought of stardust, our possible is crafted and controlled, like our care, emotion, and love are politicized. Maybe our care is the reason that produces the violence. More we care, the more we complicate our relation. To pick something which is important for us out of many relations that we inhabit with. In this sense, care can turn into a violent act. Care is the phenomena that pleases us and gives us stimulation. A kind of drug that satisfies our formal duties as a human, but does not do anything. This is what care means. Concerns without act, just symbolic gestures. This is again one of the performance where I'm holding the soil, which is coming from the ongoing construction of basement or the dug land. The soil is coming from the deep site of the earth. It's a billion huge project, therefore they need to dig deep inside. The soil has moisture in it. I am holding the soil until the heat of my body and the moisture of the soil exchange each other. This is the residue of the act. Then, looking at this residue, studying them in a different methodology, bringing not only its scientific method or outcome, but thinking about its parallel connections with workers and with laws and its politics. This is the site where the soil is coming from. Nearby this construction site, the bread seller sells the bread, and it happened to, I was, as my everyday meal, I was consuming here, taking here. And simultaneously, I was collecting the bread wrapping paper, which has oil traces on it. So this was my everyday meal during my fellowship in Lebanon. And that oil traces come to the idea to kind of investigate this oil traces. Again, in different form, different ideas, also merging the images and objects which is in the neighborhood of the construction site. Also looking at the different notions and ideas of laws and working methods. Come to the idea of that most of the workers in Beirut come from the India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and they have a different kind of methods or possibilities to work with care as a service. Means of organic production in today's industry refuses to include toxic material. Organic production that is not only meant for consumption, but has a surplus value of ecological care. The category of organic, sustainability, and saving the planet is already there in our commodity. Here is what the National Center of Organic and Natural Farmer by the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare of Government of India says about what is organic. I quote, "Organic farming ensures that nature stays clean and rich. If we visit an organic farm, and we will witness birds of animal, bird, and insects activity. Research shows that there are around 30% more wildlife and planet near ecological production field compared to conventional farming. This is because there are no pesticides or fertilizer is used far less. COVID-19 pandemic has changed the perception of organic food. With spotlight on safety and healthy food that is nutritious to build a strong immune system, it is time to talk about nutritional secretary, not a food secretary. Among the host of healthy food option available, organic food is pursued as a preferred choice. Therefore, organic food witnessed an uptake since the onset of pandemic. Organically grown food generally contain higher level of antioxidants, certain micronutrients, no harmful chemicals, pesticides, and fertilizers. Better taste, and most important thing is organically grown production aids in the sustainability of planet and maintaining ecological balance. End quote. I speculate if the farmer working in organic field are doing so well in India, why there are unreducible number of society of farmer and coming into the low income strata. In Amravati, Maharashtra, where I grown up, I myself is a listener of these stories of death. Organic farming, in my understanding, has nothing to do with farming as such. Organic farming is an entrepreneur project. They are not farmers. They are people who like to eat good food and switch between cities and outskirts, jobs and businesses, organic and chemical, regional and NRI. I have a different epistemology of farming and therefore organic. Organic defines the people and their historical relegated labor. In my mind, organic means the productive caste. People who are working in materials, including human-made and so-called natural, means organic. And occupations of outcaste, which are impure in our ideal pure society. Rancha Eli Shepherd works and talks about a lot the productive caste and unpack this idea about organic and productive caste and labor. One of his book, Buffalo Nationalism, where he says, I quote, "More you work with organic, more you become impure," end quote. Our conception of toxicity is vicious, harmful, and impure. The recognition of demon is surrounded and portrayed by a toxic substance. In Dalit collective memory, the image of untouchable is still occupied in mind. Hanging pots and brooms. Sometimes something doesn't disappear. They come back to us in a different forms and languages. Nowadays, you will see all the waste collection centers have prominently one painting on the wall commissioned by the state. This painting on the walls of waste collection buildings are flowers, solidarity, representation, and beautification. This is how we play the game. We act like we care by cleaning and planting flowers. This is the fundamental of ecological project, working as a strong analogy with care as a humanitarian act, but reducing the political awareness and criticality. These are some drawings I have developed in Amravati, simply looking at pigs and the surrounded sites in neighbor of my house. recording the sounds, producing diaries and notes.
I stay with the image in my mind that is the pig coming out from the sewage lines and walking in the city as walking on some sort of architecture of human understanding, shaking and allowing the unknown.
This ecology of impure and toxicity needs to be revolutionized to accept the waste as a new aesthetic, reserve, and potential for contemporary life. Not only settlement of minorities near to the gigantic dumping ground, but looking at dumping as a new natural parks, where we can jog, walk, and talk while looking at what we use for our inhabitants. Pigs sustaining on waste infrastructure and sewage line, coming out into the cities and uttering the voice that articulates something very crucial. It's not cinematic alien abstraction, which we do not have potential to listen, but it's a voice that transplant our organs. Recent bioengineering says that pig's organ is one of the most suitable organ for human transplantation. So it's not cinematic alien abstraction, which we do not have a potential to listen, but a kind of voice that transplant our organs, as well as our possible to imagine the concept of toxicity, contamination, and inhabitation. This is a recent project which I did in Bombay, tracing the wastewater lines, small lines entering to river, river entering into sea, sea coming back to the river, river going back to the nalas. These are some snapshots of the video. The water bodies in many civilizations have been a site of resource, basis for settlement and structuring society. This water not only gives us its material as a utility object to survive, but shows something more. This is the one of the performance where you can see the two glass. One glass was filled with water, and I was sipping the water but not drinking it, and throwing it to another glass, and doing it vice versa until water vanished. In that process, the water gets stinky, glittery, or some sort of tar. In Indic civilization, most of the water bodies have a temple located to protect and maintain the site, the water bodies. This temple not only maintain the water, but produce the notion of purity with the water. Drinking water is not only the human act, but contains something very important about our history and contemporary inhabitants. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in 1927 walked to the lake and drank the water to invent the axiom law of equality in our modern time. A critical point to any form of inhabitants to take place. In that sense, he is not merely producing the resistance to Brahmins, but articulating the equality. And water is just a stroke, a kind of drawing. My point here is come to the non-representation, disembodiment with beliefs that allows us to enter into new epistemology. The act of drinking water is not something human needs or access to particular site as one is prohibited, but some kind of possible that is completely open into new. I like to call it unarrivable, potential to hold and think beyond our own possibilities. Our cosmos is impure and wounded. Therefore, there is life. The wound gives us new skin. The world is not healing. It is contaminating. Therefore, we have connection, relation, association. More importantly, politics. Without contamination, there is no connection as such. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar explained associate living in Annihilation of Caste. I quote, an ideal society should be mobile, should be full of channels for conveying a change taking place in one part to another part. An ideal society, there should be many interests consciously communicating and shared. There should be very free points of contact with other modes of association. A primary mode of association living, of conjoined communication experience. It is essential an attitude for respect and reverence towards fellow man. End quote. If we do not have an experience of fellowship, we come to the point that we inhabit a society of separation. On the other hand, care on a planetary scale allows us to think about planet safety, so the human future is safe. Therefore, equality and care becomes a cause of apocalyptic. The catastrophe does not seek the caste, class, gender, and so on. We are in the same boat, floating in the flooded city. This is what I see today's equality and care as a simulated one, based on cause and effect, second-hand experiences. There is no other provocation ecological care does to my mind. It is symptom like a death drive, maybe inevitable. Catastrophe invent the future societies. Geological time explain the ancient life and microism before human came on earth has converted into today's oil and coal that we use for our living. We cannot exclude our industrial exploitation of resource of fossil fuel of planet. The only reason we are communicating here is through the internet. Because of gigantic cable connection under the water and many other exploitations. We cannot stay in concrete house and talk about organic life. On other side, people who are settling on minority architecture sharing never utter the word of ecological care, organic life, and so on. This dead end problem was what Ambedkar called life of contradiction. In the Constitutional Assembly 1950, Ambedkar realized very unique and crucial, I quote, "We are going to enter in the life of contradiction. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economical life, we will have inequality." End quote. This is the fundamental insight to rethink about care and acts, our worries and freedom, our virtual and actual. Ambedkar points out our situation clearly. A more immediate question is not future thinking, but fundamental to inhabit with. How long we will be in life of contradiction? If we continue to deny it for a long time, we'll do so only putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who are suffering from the contradiction will blow up the structure. In this sense, maybe not caring is the option. Accepting the life how it is. At least moving ahead from contradiction. Finding a way with toxicity, contamination, and pandemics. That is how the life of outcaste is. And it is not what today's time is making us feel, but it is an historical force existence in the making of inhabitants with care.
Mohit?
Yeah.
Hi. Are you done? Sorry. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, I think I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, Thanks a lot for that wonderful talk and for sharing your work. I'll before I sort of initiate the dialogue, I just wanted to open it up for everyone who's here attending as well as on the YouTube channel. If you have any questions, if you wanted to come into the conversation, please, post these questions on the chat window or raise your hand and then we can add you to the conversation. Yeah. Okay. Okay. It's, what is sort of interesting, and it's just a relationship to the conversations that we've had before, is sort of the shifting register of care with which you sort of begin looking at care, right? Which is not thinking about care. I mean, one is to think about care as the symbolic act, which is sort of just a gesture, but sort of thinking of care from sort of a point of contamination in some sense, right? And in that sense, I was wondering, is I mean, if you see it as this kind of an oppositional in an oppositional sense where care is sort of done away with, or does it require a different kind of a what we call a different kind of an epistemology of care itself, right? Because I mean, the work that you show, all of the work that you've been engaging with, be it the sounds of the pigs, working with, like I said, breathing and sinking in the wastewater, living with toxicities. It still requires, in some sense, a different kind of a connection, right? Which is not necessarily to separate, but bring out a different kind of a connection. I mean, a lot of the work that you're showing is about the residues and the excess and the toxic materials that you start putting in relationship to life of workers, histories of the past, that questions of the organic, but different kinds of things that are going on in different cities, right? So what is it that what is this practice that you sort of think about of putting these things together? How do you think about it? And where contamination, like for instance, medicine, a lot of the work, if you look at the COVID right now, so the medicine or the vaccine itself has been some form of a toxicity that comes with care, right? It's not necessarily a separate thing. So I was wondering, how do you think in your own work about building these relationships, right, between of living with toxicities, but also drawing out these drawing connections, which you call contamination, right? Like, what is the practice there? And what I'm trying to sort of get to is that, does it require a different kind of a register of how we build relationships with waste, right? Or with things, with all the things that you're showing and talking about, right? There is, it's not hard relationship. There is a sort of a softness of pulling things in the hand, working with despite being toxic, right? So how would you characterize this relationship? What kind of a practice do you think is involved there?
I think maybe we can go with some questions and maybe I will come back to the point.
Okay. So I mean, actually, so there's one question from Chaitanya Sambrani. So he's asking, firstly, Mohit, thank you for your presentation. Would you like to reflect on different ways in which concepts such as care, contamination, and organicity are constructed and deployed across subaltern cultures outside India? In other words, is there a way to extend your critique to notions of subalterns, solidarities across national boundaries?
Yeah, I think one of my project, which take place in Beirut, the project called Khairnar, comes with this idea, which is like beyond the nation. uh, um, there you can sense some sort of uh, beyond borders concepts of uh, organicity as the impure connection. So most of the cleaners again has this kind of uh, subaltern connection there. So this historical connection with the working with waste and the toxicity, and within that, how to kind of channelize the care is the kind of situation I kind of deal with.
There's another question. Hi, Mohit. I understood that Mr. Ambedkar talked about how life could be hot, even though we are living in the present or the future. But I would love to know more exactly what did you mean while talking about how water talks about equality and how it articulates equality. I agree with the fact of that water does articulate equality, but sometimes if we talk about the disputes relating to water and how water is being the most important thing in the world nowadays, and people are talking to save water since a long time. So if you can just expand on what you meant by the idea of water conveys equality.
So my understanding here is bringing Ambedkar here, the protest which had happened at Nashik, Chowra Tale, where Ambedkar drinks the water. And Shomu Chakrabarti has a very interesting book on it, where he explained this particular act as a invention of equality in modern time. And he kind of categorized this kind of 4 different patterns of equality as such. So, but I think here the water doesn't remain to have a very specific symbolic order to articulate the equality. While doing so, I think water goes back to the notion of ecology and care. But what comes further is equality. So here, the point is not the Dalit community want in that particular time want water from particular lake, but to invent the idea of equality.
There's one more question from Corina Dean, who's from University of Westminster. Can you expand on whether there were obstructions to your research in terms of understanding the complexities of water infrastructures, especially in relationship to your mapping of tracing lines of toxicity? How much did you rely on observations and what were your methods here? So if you can talk about how are you engaging with this, in your work, which sort of these lines of toxicities, sort of the different rows of water in which you're examining these toxicities, how do you sort of work with that?
Sir, can you get your mic closer? I'm just losing.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm just wondering, can you see the question and answer?
Yeah, I'm reading.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just looking for the others, which is, what was your research method of how do you interact and engage with these lines of toxicities that you're working with?
Just a minute. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much rely on observations, and I think that is the one point I kind of consider as a practice, uh, completely looking at observation, but also, you know, putting the observation with some sort of um, reading analysis.
Those are the questions that we have now. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I was wondering if you wanted to sort of, return to and I mean, let me just sort of explain why I'm asking that question. It sort of emerges from the ideas that were so foundational to curating this session, right? Which is the idea of care itself as some form of cultivation, but also you know reading around the idea of pharmacology, which is this sort of this coming from Stigler's notion of it, where care and toxicity or cure and toxicity are something that have merged into one another, right? And so to even work with toxicity or to pay attention to toxicity allows it requires some kind of a relationship with the toxic or with waste, which is not a relationship or separation or some sort of a purity, but engaging, like a lot of the work that you're showing that requires that going close or drawing things near to sort of explore a different kind of an epistemology of care, right? And in that sense, I was wondering that it's what you're calling the unarrivable has that if it required like to which might never arrive in that sense, but it's always something that is virtual. It requires that kind of an engagement with waste objects, with toxic materials, living with it to sort of come to a different sort of understanding of what inhabitation might be. So that's where the questions kind of comes from, and it's I mean, your work has been in that sense of going beyond the simply working with these sort of residues. So I was wondering, I mean, just to sort of reflect on your own work, if you thought about it.
Yeah. So I see it more as like a situations. I don't particularly, have any kind of conception of the ideas. It's more like a immediate reality which you are surrounded, and somehow developing some sort of thinking with it, as well as some methodology in relation with body. So some of the works has this kind of bodily duration with that.
Right.
Even this the recent work where I have seen the top of the river where the Bandra sort of this water pipeline goes, and the area is spooky, and it's very druggy area also. And this association with toxicity and drug and this kind of this kind of depth of senses is somewhere I think is to go with it.
Yeah.
And probably have some sort of potential to see the future.
Right. Okay, we'll come back to that. There's more questions by Rishali Purandare. So, dear Mohit, thank you for your wonderful presentation and for countering the so-called decolonial discourse on care with your proposition of embracing toxicity. This, to me, seems like a beginning of epistemic disobedience. I do wonder, how do you think about politics of excess in relation to politics of toxicity and contamination?
You wonder. So access in terms of material resource access, right? That is the connection here. In that sense, it's a kind of Marxist class understanding, I think. And yeah, I mean, I hope I'm reading the question correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I would think it's in terms of sort of the excess can be read in different ways, right? The excess of the surplus of capital, but also excess in terms of things that lie outside the idea of what we think is organic, or it's sort of the excess in terms of of water and as sewerage, of meaning as something that doesn't make sense. So I was wondering if you're drawing these sort of threads together, which you do in some sense, but.
So I think the way I understand is access. Our traditional understanding with contamination access produce contamination or toxicity. So a lot of nalas which I covered, the waste is coming from the center of the city and coming into the edges or the borders of the coast, right? So, and that is the kind of space where a minority is settled. So, but I'm more interested with to kind of also not look at that sense, but also prominently, that is some sort of epistemological disobedience for me, to not kind of think about the access as such. That is again going for me into that dimension of decolonial, I think. But looking at this particular site and how the body is there.
Okay, there's two more questions. Actually, there's lots of questions. So there's someone who's asking, it is interesting for me to see garbage land as playground, but I would be keen to know what will be the material for children and adults play with and what will happen to their health. I would like to know the thought behind the statement. How do you want to do this?
Yeah, I hope that's the ideas which are coming to allow us to think.
Right.
I may not have an answer to this particular question.
Okay. Next one is, thanks from Arya, I wanted to hear more on contamination. If you could use it as a metaphor that aspires to break from the nation state confinement. What is contamination, and is it important to ask whether it is imposed upon the periphery, subaltern, minoritized, or it is springing from the bottom to the top? In other words, is it important to understand the morphology of the way in which the contamination disseminates?
Recalling Santosh Sadanand has a very interesting point to make here. We call it the double conscious, where he talks about a community which never becomes a citizen or never becomes the part of out of the nation. So this again, this question of decoloniality or the nation, I not immediately think so sharply about it because they doesn't exist for me that much. And the
Is it an idea that sort of emerges from the field that you worked with, and how it sort of disseminates itself while in terms of breaking out of some sort of notion of the nation state? If there's something that you see working with say the figure of the outcast, if that is something that emerges from there.
Yeah, I think sometimes I think becoming a more capitalistic, and have some sort of Dalit capitalism also.
Right. Can you speak
yeah.
a bit more about it?
I'm also formulating.
Okay. But where does it come from? I mean, what is so the thinking behind this?
Yeah. So the reference with Ambedkar, I think, to see the modernity as like even thinking about thinking in my native language prohibits me to think beyond its own construct. Whether the language of colonial gives me to access to the philosophy, to the beyond. In that sense, I think I'm more inclined towards accelerating free economy and free capitalism.
Right. But I mean, in your work, you also do talk about, in some sense, the idea of like purity and protection as a capitalist notion, right? So how does it play out in terms of thinking about this, this idea of sort of acceleration and movement and freedom that it allows, but at the same time there is, in some sense, this notion of protection from the future, which sort of protects. Yeah.
No, the question is immediate one, not the future one. So that is what Ambedkar again says in this constitutional assembly. Our worry is not ultimate future, right?
Right.
He points out towards the immediate reality, I think.
Right. Let me just check. I was sort of also interested in this something again, drawing upon your own work. There is a sense of the looking for the possible in the material itself, right? Something that you sort of explored in terms of sonic and the experience of, or the idea of the pig itself, which allows to open up the idea of transplantation, right? If and so, where do you see this, or how do you see this relationship, or the coming of the unarrivable, right? And this is going back to the question is, what kind of relationships are we talking about with the toxic? Right. One is, talk about in terms of the playground, the waste ground itself, the playground. But how do you see it in terms of, say, working with, say, water? Right? Is there something that you see of this possible, not just in the body and its immediate experience, but also in terms of the relationship that builds with the water, right? So what kind of that relationship are you thinking about?
Yeah, so this idea of park, in my understanding, allows me to give some sort of idea in a way to accept accept the toxicity,
Right.
and kind of think with it how to kind of sustain and live with it. And also resisting towards this kind of symbolic gesture of care. At the same time, thinking the particular community having this kind of experience,
Right.
fourth experience of existence with toxicity. And through that, what comes, which disobeys our epistemology, our knowledge.
Right.
And there I stuck, I think.
Right. Yeah, because it's in some sense both violent, but also it's not in the sense of it's forced, but it's still yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm not. I think it's something that seems at least to me, it's something that I can't articulate at this moment. But if you've thought about it, what is this? This relationship, which is both violence, but also, yeah, I don't know what the other word is, but if you've still thought about it,
yeah, I mean, I won't say. I mean, I don't have issue with terms of violence, but I see as again this kind of everyday living, no?
Yeah, yeah.
That is how the life looks like.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean,
Right. Right. And I mean, I asked this particularly because, like, the waste worker is someone who has that kind of violent experience in life, working in a dumping ground, but it's still and this is something that is comes from my own work, which is still there is certain sense of a calculation of working in the dumping ground, right? Of the everyday rhythm of engaging with objects, sort of across in the, the cuts and the everything that the body goes through, but still looking for something that has the potential to be sold and to be recycled, things that they collect which can't be recycled but sort of kept, so that experience which is immediate, something that is I haven't seen anyone articulate, so that, but I mean that it's immediate, but it's also still a way, it has a certain sense of a calculation of, working there, right?
In between, I lose your voice.
Sorry. No, I mean, what I'm trying to ask is that the idea of the unarrivable sort of emerges in the immediate, but the immediate also requires some kind of repetitive, calculated exchange, despite the violence of it, right? And what is that? That experience of it? What is that interaction? What is the relationship one has with the tox, with the residue?
Yeah. So I think here, this again, with the Navyana movement, moving towards Buddhist philosophy, finding some sort of what's called Madhyam Marg,
Okay.
and not having any notion towards something which is some sort of unarrivable, but holding on the situation,
Right.
and looking at the possible. And this idea of in my work, I think the residue is just some sort of some sort of act which goes out from your action and stays there, some sort of stoppage of your performance. But also there are different kind of measuring methods.
Right.
So baking the soil, the measurement of heat of the body, as well as moisture which is getting reduced.
Right.
So it's not merely bodily or scientific for me.
Right. Right.
It is something again hinting towards some sort of conceptuality.
Right.
In the same line, there was a same work, the depth I measure with the thread while throwing the small stone attached to the rope, single thread. And that thread comes on breast until the blood circulation numbs. This kind of measures I'm somehow kind of interested with in relation to body and sight.
Right. Let me just check questions. So there aren't any more questions, but I'm sure everyone's sort of processing your work and excellent talk. I mean, for us, it sort of helped us open up a whole new register of thinking about care, to think about it from a very different, like you say, a different way, a very different epistemology, a very different sort of line of thought, actually. Thanks a lot for this. It's actually been great having a conversation with you, but also thanks to the audience for sticking with us and for all your questions. So Mohit, thanks again for sharing your work. we would want to, have a more longer engagement. Over we see more of your work when you're in Mumbai. But for now, we'll stop here. Thanks a lot for this excellent talk. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. So we'll end the talk here. Thanks everyone for being with us. Bye.